So here we are in the little behind the floristry building here in horticulture, little courtyard with the with a magnolia stellata just coming into bloom. We're going to be talking about that plant later on in the semester. But I'm back here to introduce a group of plants. We're actually going to do 4 of these, maybe a little disproportionately represented here, but we're going to do 4 of these. They are enormously important in horticulture, and those are the Pelargonium. The Pelargonium. These are called geraniums. Sort of casually, common name geraniums as a group. But also very widely known as Pelargonium, which is their official botanical designation. Now I have a few of them in front of me here, and I'll explain that momentarily. But fundamentally, the most widely planted and utilized of these are highly hybridized, highly domesticated forms. And I have representatives of those 3 right here that very quickly, and we're going to take a closer look at these, before long. But I wanted to give some perspective before I really launched into our first Pelargonium. And what I have here, I have a cutting, just a little cutting of a plant called the Martha Washington. It's one of the common names, Martha Washington geranium, hybrid species Pelargonium domesticum. We're actually not going to describe this plant in any detail this semester. We've taught it here for years. I'm going to let it go because I had to make room for that Achillea that I introduced. And then here you see a couple of sometimes called zonals or just common geranium. Called zonals because of this coloration, this sort of band of coloration that we see. Actually on the next door neighbor here, you see a little zone as well. But anyway, this is hybrid species Pelargonium hortorum, the common geranium, very common. Now these are kind of ragged looking, these 2 that we have here, but these are represent a huge and old and very important group of Pelargonium. And then next to them, this one that's looking a little better, growing nicely in this container, an ivy geranium, Pelargonium peltatum. And we'll return to these other 2 a little later. But I just wanted to let you know these represent the domesticum, the hortorum, and the peltatum. Those represent 3 very large groups of highly domesticated, highly hybridized forms that probably constitute most of the Pelargonium that we see. And actually there are crosses between these groups that are also popular. So it gets kind of complicated quickly, but these are sort of 3 the 3 big domesticated groups. The fourth sort of major group of Pelargonium that we use in horticulture are represented over here. Now this is a little bit sad. These plants are struggling to find their way out and above all this English ivy. But here is an example of a scented geranium. And the scented geraniums, there's lots of hybridization and selection that goes on within the scented geraniums, but the scented geraniums, more than many, rely on these Pelargonium, the selections that we use in horticulture rely more on species plants. And we're going to start, we actually are going to cover 2 of the scented geraniums in this class, and the first one here is graveolens, the rose scented geranium. And you can see what distinguishes graveolens are it's actually representative of this type of scented geranium is the highly divided leaf. These leaves are very much divided and have a deep sinuses in between these lobes, and many of our scented geraniums have this form. So as I'm sort of fondling this leaf, I'm anticipating smelling. Yeah, there it is, that wonderful fragrance, and very much rose-like. And of course, different roses have different fragrances, so I suppose you could start an argument somewhere, but really, these are very much rose-scented. And people who collect these, and there are hobbyists whose day sort of start and end with which scented geranium they can collect next, whether it's an almond or lemon or chocolate. I mean, you name it, there's a scented geranium that smells like any given fragrance. So anyway, this is sort of the fourth big group. I showed you those really domesticated forms a moment ago, and then the scented geraniums that the graveolens here represents is the fourth group. So just some quick things on graveolens. Rose scented for the common name. It's like all of these geraniums, it's an herbaceous perennial, a broadleaf evergreen herbaceous perennial. Now understand, especially those other three, or especially the other two, the hortorum and the ivy geranium, the peltatum, those are most often grown as annuals in most parts of the world. Here in San Francisco, we enjoy all of these as perennials, which is sort of what God intended these to be. They originate from South Africa, and that's the nativity that you should use certainly for this one. And in South Africa, where these arose from, most of these, they live as herbaceous perennials from year to year, short-lived, but they're not big woody plants that go on for decades, but they are perennial in form. So broadleaf, evergreen, herbaceous perennial is how you could call these. I'm going to step back here, and you can see there are a couple others that are sort of doing the same here, just sort of hanging on. These don't get much water. Infrequent but thorough water is what I'd give you for graveolens. It's one that takes a little bit less water than those highly hybridized forms that I showed you a moment ago. And as far as light goes, full sun, light shade, is where these are at best. They'll take a little more shade, but start to look less compact. They start to sprawl a little bit, and really full sunlight shade is where we would generally use these to best advantage. These scented geraniums, you can see this one actually not bad, has shows a little bit, but most of these scented geraniums, the flowers are small and usually not very showy white, or purple like you see here, or something in between, and really not grown for the flowers. Maybe a couple of them have been selected a little bit for that, but not much. So anyway, I think we've covered the basics on this, and very sturdy plants, a little bit attractive to whitefly, I'll say. Got to watch out for that, but for the most part, pretty pest free. All right, so that gets us started on these Pelargonium. Understand that although we use the name rose-scented geranium rather than rose-scented Pelargonium, these are not so-called true geraniums. We will be tackling at least one true geranium before the end of the term, but even though they are in the geranium family, the Geraniaceae, the Pelargonium have a little bit different characteristics. The flowers they're a little bit asymmetrical compared to the true geraniums, and there are other differences. They're not as hardy as most of the geraniums, and some other differences, but we'll tease those out when we talk about the geraniums. All right, on to the next Pelargonium.